Good afternoon, gamers, and welcome to yet another informative episode of Games with Dave. Today, I have the pleasure of being joined by Dr. Jason Bowers. Dr. Bowers is currently running a Kickstarter, 5 Acts, The King in Yellow, based on Robert W. Chambers' 1895 stories in The King in Yellow. And today, we're going to dive a little bit into both the game and the story. And welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Dave. This is great. I'm a big fan of the show, and I champ at the bit to ever talk about Chambers or the King in Yellow or anything related to it. So this is a real treat.
Yeah, I'm excited because, as we'll get into a little bit in a little bit, there's a lot of confusion with the King in Yellow. And I was even a little confused. So we'll get into that in a little bit. But really, the first thing that kind of popped into my head is, can you kind of tell folks like me, really, that have never read the stories, kind of about them and how it inspired you to create 5 Acts?
Of course, yeah, absolutely. So in 1895, Robert W. Chambers wrote an anthology of short stories called The King in Yellow. The first four are something like horror stories. They're very gothic. They have macabre themes, and like 19th century Gothic literature, they're also full of lots of romanticism. There's broken hearts and love triangles and aspirational yearning and stuff like that. In these stories, there are characters who read a stage play called The King in Yellow, and anyone who reads the stage play either loses their minds, disappears under mysterious circumstances, or both. And in this respect, The King in Yellow is likely to remind 21st century readers of, say, H.P. Lovecraft's book, The Necronomicon, or just the now generic trope of the eldritch grimoire that shatters your mind, or whatever. As for the stage play itself, it is about another world, maybe another universe called Carcosa. And Carcosa is this strangely described place where there are black stars in the sky, where there are a pair of suns that sink into a vaporous ocean, and where the shadow of people's thoughts lengthen and linger. We're told that it's a realm of dead souls, and it's got some very captivating yet sparse imagery that has grabbed the imagination of many horror fans and fantasy fans and sci-fi fans. Now, I came to reading. I read The King in Yellow, as many people do, or I initially came to it because I was reading cosmic horror stuff. I was enjoying Lovecraft and Ramsey Campbell and these other writers, and Chambers was listed as not only a classic bit of early cosmic horror, but also as something that influenced Lovecraft considerably. So I picked it up and I read it, and I realized that there was some really original writing and imagination here, and that I was reading a set of stories that were much more than just a precursor to Lovecraft. There was a unique sort of vision about Gothic horror and cosmic horror and certain ideas that are bound up with religion, and as well as certain narrative themes that are quite unique. Themes about unreliable narrators, reading a story that's written in the first person, and you realize midway through that you can't trust what this person is saying. So I thought, I fell in love with it immediately. It changed my life. Much like the characters in Robert W. Chambers' stories who read The King in Yellow, the stage play, and become obsessed with it, I, in real life, read Chambers' book, The King in Yellow, became obsessed with it. And I started to discover all the talented writers who are writing today, who have continued sort of Chambers' own unique mythos, detached from any sort of Lovecraftian association. So there's writers like Robin Laws and John Langan and Carl Edward Wagner and a bunch of these, Kathleen Shiner. There are a lot of really talented writers whose works I love, and they also kind of continue Chambers mythos. So I was inspired by all of that, and I wanted to make a horror RPG. And I thought, let me introduce people to the King in Yellow stories. Um, and I wanted to do it in a way that was faithful to the stories. Not that I'm the only one to have this ambition, but if you look at the other tabletop role playing games in which the King in Yellow appears, these are all games where the PCs are investigators, right? They play as
Yes.
investigators, right? You investigate mysteries, you solve mysteries, you follow clues, right? And you might lose your mind, and if you do, it's game over. And that's cool. I love that type of game. I love it. But Chambers' original stories aren't about investigators. They're not. They're about desperate people who have read The King in Yellow, and then they recount incredible events that are so incredible that you might doubt whether they're telling the truth. Chamber stories are about unreliable narrators, and I thought a good King in Yellow game, or at least a King in Yellow game, the likes of which I would want to make and play, that should be one where the PCs are unreliable narrators. So we designed a game that's kind of a storytelling game where the PCs play people who have already read The King in Yellow, right? And they seem to have supernatural powers. They have supernatural convictions or convictions about the supernatural. And as gameplay proceeds, a lot of incredible things happen. At the end of the game, there's sort of a phase of play where the players all look back and they kind of reinterpret the series of events that took place, right?
Very cool.
Right. So like as you play the game, of course your character has the power to rot things with a touch and to wield these necromantic abilities. But then you get to the end of the game and it's like, well, what happened seemed rather strange, didn't it? Suppose your character didn't have necromantic abilities. How would you have explained what happened here? What happened here? What happened there? And you sort of retell the story. And we've got mechanics to make that easy and to make it fun and stuff. So I was inspired by Chambers' stories and especially by the experience of discovering Chambers' unique identity as a writer and trying to put it into our game.
Well, it seems very cool what you've done. I downloaded, and I will make sure I put a link in the description for the PDF so that folks can download that. And this just looks so incredibly fun because it is so different. Like you were saying, you're not the investigator, you're the victim basically of the game, which is such a cool concept. One of the things I noticed, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I wanted to add, in games like Call of Cthulhu or Delta Green, right, your your character's story ends if they read the Necronomicon or
Right.
right. If they read the Forbidden Grimoire of Eldritch Truths, that's the end of their story. They're gone by that point. Mind go bye-bye. In our game, that's the beginning of your story. The story begins with you having read this stuff. And now, as incredible things unfold, you have this premise, which facilitates this question of, well, are you really experiencing these things? Is this really how crazy the world is? Or is it just that you read that stage play and now you can't be trusted to see the world accurately?
So cool. I've got to tell you, the first movie that pops into my mind hearing this concept is Jacob's Ladder.
Oh, yeah.
Because of just all of the imagery that I can't remember the character's name now, but of everything that he's seeing that's not necessarily there.
Yeah.
And I love that movie, so I know I'm going to love the correlation there. I know I'm going to love this game once I get it. So
yeah, it's an excellent cinematic representation of an unreliable narrator, I think. I also would add, or at least for me, I find this film to be quite Chambers-esque, is Terry Gilliam's film The Fisher King from 1991, starring Jeff Bridges and Robin Williams, where you've got the character of Perry, who suffered a horrible tragedy and, isn't doing very well. And you'd think that the reason why he's not doing well is because of the tragedy he suffered. He lost his wife.
Right.
But when you ask him about this stuff, why he's so miserable, or try to, he doesn't talk about his wife. He doesn't talk about the real tragedy. Instead, he talks about this fantastic character, the Red Knight, and how he's on a quest to find the Holy Grail, right? And it's sort of a sad, it's a depiction of a sad person who's suffering in one way, and they deal with it by coming up with a fantasy that's of something else. In the Repairer of Reputations, the most famous story in The King in Yellow, you've got Hildred Castaigne, who, he, by all appearances, is obsessed with a woman named Constance and wants to, be with her. He screams at himself in the mirror about her. He, has wandering conversations with a friend about her and whether she's going to get married to his cousin and how much he hates that idea. And he tells his cousin, like, he forbids his cousin from marrying Constance. So you'd think that Hildred is like, he's a lovelorn guy and he needs to deal with that problem. But he doesn't talk about it that way. Instead, in the same way that Perry talks about the Red Knight, and how he's on the quest for the Holy Grail, Hildred talks about the King in Yellow and Lost Carcosa and being in line from an extraterrestrial dynasty destined to rule the United States after getting people to overthrow the government in his name and stuff. Like weird things where,
Wow.
again, you've got a character who is suffering from a very real, obvious sort of problem, right? Brokenhearted, unrequited love stuff. But then they articulate all their pain and their sorrow and their ambition gets sort of recast in this weird fantasy, right? So I think of the Fisher King as being very similar to the Repairer of Reputations. I would also maybe suggest, when I was a kid, there was a comic book series published by Image Comics. It was called The Maxx, Maxx, and it featured a character who was either just an unhoused individual in poverty, down on his luck, or like a supernatural hero in a fantasy dreamlike landscape where he was like a warrior and it would go back and forth in a way where it wasn't sure which of these is the totally accurate picture, if it's a mixture of them. There was an animated series, I think, on like Liquid Television or something, but I would also add that.
Yeah,
but Jacob's Ladder for sure.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to check out The Maxx. That actually sounds like a really cool comic, because I love comics, and how I don't know about it kind of makes me a little mad at myself.
I think it was a short run series. It was like right when Image Comics was founded, with like Spawn and Wildcats and Savage Dragon and those ones.
Yeah. They've been around for a while. They've blown up, but that's a completely other. I could talk to you about comics for hours, so we won't do that today.
Fair enough.
So in the PDF, one of the things that I saw brought up was the yellow sign.
Yes.
What exactly is the yellow sign for anyone that, like myself, that may not know?
Yeah. So this is a fascinating element and an enduring element of Chambers' stories. So based on the 4 stories that most people read up from The King in Yellow, the ones that are the most influential in horror, the yellow sign is some kind of glyph, rune, or letter. It's like a written character. Chambers describes it as being like a character that's neither Arabic nor Chinese, but has like a sort of a strange and compelling appearance. In the Repairer of Reputations, Hildred is meeting with a friend or a confidant. They're talking about overthrowing the United States and making Hildred into an emperor. And one of the things that comes up is who they're going to send the yellow sign to. And the idea was that if you send somebody the yellow sign, it's a way of controlling them or manipulating them, commanding them. It seems as though the yellow sign has some kind of supernatural power connected to the entities referenced in The King in Yellow, or the world Carcosa referenced in The King in Yellow. One of the stories that Chambers wrote, perhaps the most famous after the Repairer of Reputations, is called The Yellow Sign. And in it, a character, Jack, he finds or is given like this little stone that has the yellow sign carved into it. And shortly after he finds it, like, he has this dream where a watchman from a churchyard, like a grave keeper type fellow, he just asks him over and over, "Have you found the yellow sign? Have you found the yellow sign?" And it starts to get to Jack and disturb him. He starts to lose his mind over it. And at the end of the story, that strange macabre gravekeeper fellow like comes to him, finds him, and seems to kill him. Right? The idea is like he found the yellow sign, and then having done so, it attracted a kind of monster or a kind of ghoul to come and slay him.
Wow.
It's not clear that that's exactly what happens, because again, we're getting the story from somebody who read The King in Yellow and who doesn't seem to be entirely in his right mind, at least by the end of the tale. But the yellow sign in Chambers is like this eldritch glyph that's connected to the world of Carcosa and has some strange supernatural power, either to manipulate people, control their minds, or to call doom upon them. In our game, the yellow sign is a means by which your character can achieve power, or at least that's what they think. In our game, your character has read The King in Yellow. They believe that they must conquer the world, or achieve something similarly fantastical, and that the only way for them to do this is to find the yellow sign and use its power. So a lot of the first part of the game, the characters are sort of looking for the yellow sign. And it could be anything. It could be like in Chamber's story, it could be like a stone that has a carving on it. It could be maybe something written on a sheet of paper. It could be a line of code. It could be a melody that gets played when you feed a certain bit of sheet music into a player piano. There's a lot of ways to take what the yellow sign is. We're very open about that part. But yeah, it's from Chambers' work. It's a strange supernatural rune or glyph it seems to have some eldritch power over people's minds, as well as some connection to the world of Carcosa.
Very cool. I like it a lot.
Yeah.
One of the things you just kind of touched on was another thing from the PDF that I had wanted to touch on, and I guess this is the perfect time for it, is the creativity that it evokes and how it can it could be set in 1895 or 2095, really, if you wanted to. Do you think like a really creative GM could make some kind of generational saga of like a family? I was thinking about that earlier. I'm like, ooh, this could make for a neat campaign if you did some kind of generational, like say Grandpa Jones found a stone. We'll use that example and put it in a box. Years later, his great-grandson discovers the stone or something.
That is, I mean, the answer to your question is an enthusiastic yes. What a lovely idea. In fact, if we ever use it, I'll credit you.
Awesome.
Because in our game is designed for one-shot play. So you sit down with your friends, 3 to 5 players. It's going to take 3 to 5 hours probably to play it. And at the end of any session, your characters are probably done for in one sense or another, right? Either by the end of every game session, your PCs are dead, utterly diluted, or perhaps engaged in some kind of supernatural destiny that will occupy them for the rest of their lives. And so this is not a game designed for continuing characters that go from one adventure to the other or anything like that. Not like D&D or whatever, or even but now that you mention it, this would be the kind of game where if you wanted to string together a set of stories and say like, well, we're going to begin in Paris 1895 with these ill-fated art students, and then we're going to scoot forward to the Prohibition era where some descendants of those art students. Actually, this is something it would be unfair of me not to mention this. Robin Laws, one of I think the greatest game designers out there, and I love his writing too, his fiction. Robin Laws has his own King in Yellow game. It's just called the Yellow King RPG, and it is also very informed by Chambers stories, and Chambers taken as a unique sort of writer. And his is long form play using the gumshoe system, and so you're sort of doing that. But he suggests that's something he kind of suggests too is you might have one session of or one chunk of your of your game, occur in one, among like 19th century art students, and then like a later chunk of your game occur in the 21st century with Starbucks employees or whatever. So that's an idea which would also work for our game. Although I must admit I hadn't thought of applying it until you just asked just now.
Well,
That's
see, it works. That's
cool idea.
a great thing about us talking. It's who
Yes.
would have imagined that we could have spawned a neat idea from it?
There are some ideas that take many people together to sort of midwife them into existence.
Yeah.
True.
Another thing that we were kind of talking about before went live, and I touched on it in the intro, saying there was a lot of confusion around what or who the King in Yellow really is.
Right.
And you were starting to talk about it, and then we had to go live. So
Yeah.
I'd love to have you kind of almost start over on that and
Sure.
talk about that.
Yes. Okay. Good. So, I mentioned Chambers published his work in 1895. It enjoyed both commercial and critical success. Chambers did not really return that frequently to writing horror fiction or fantastic fiction after that. In fact, he spent most of his career writing melodramas and romances, lots of romance stories, some of which were adapted into very early pieces of American cinema, which is kind of neat. But
very cool.
Lovecraft, H.P. Lovecraft was a fan of the King in Yellow stories. And he wrote about that in his essay on supernatural horror and literature. He wrote about how Chambers was one of the few writers who really got this cosmic horror stuff. And Lovecraft enjoyed Chambers' work so much that he included references to Hastur and the Yellow Sign in his story, The Whisperer in Darkness. So a lot of folks who read Lovecraft or who read Lovecraft would associate, those names with him. But this was amplified by the fact that Lovecraft's most devoted anthologist and his close friend and the man thanks to whom we have all heard of Lovecraft today, August Derleth, right? August Derleth had taken Lovecraft's work and creations and kind of did this expanded cosmology with it, right? Whereas Lovecraft himself would make references over here to Yog-Sothoth and references over there to Azathoth and references over here to Cthulhu. And a lot of times these creations only appeared in one story or two stories. And, there wasn't any kind of like explicitly described, system for them or theology or anything. Derleth did construct such a theology, right? So Derleth would be the one who says, okay, so there's a hierarchy of these beings, and Yog-Sothoth is, the most powerful great old one who's at the center of the universe doing this, and then you've got Cthulhu, who's related to Yog-Sothoth this way and in a different way from Azathoth, and right, and in the same way that in ancient Greek mythology, you've got, the 12 Olympian deities, and there's a fact about who's a sibling of who, and there's like little mini gods that are descended from them. We got a similarly discursive kind of Cthulhu theology from Derleth. But the thing is, Derleth, he didn't just incorporate Lovecraft's creations into this cosmology. He incorporated other writers too, including Chambers. So either not being interested in Chambers' own sort of intent or just being really enthusiastic over his own different intent, Derleth took the King in Yellow and Hastur and some other names of things and places from the king from those stories, and just sort of, made some shit up about them, right? Yep. Like just made some stuff up. So in Derleth's cosmology, Hastur is like is a great old one who's the brother of Cthulhu, and is a similarly tentacled, horror. And then the King in Yellow is like an avatar of Hastur. So I guess there's kind of like this relationship of King in Yellow is to Hastur as like, I don't know, Jesus is to Yahweh or something.
Gotcha.
And that's and that sort of conception that sort of stuck for a while because in the early adventures and scenarios for say the role-playing game Call of Cthulhu, that they took a very Derlithian interpretation of the King in Yellow, very Derlithian interpretation of Hastur. But if you look in the original stories, Hastur is the name of a planet or a star. The name, of course, goes back to Ambrose Bierce, a writer of whom Chambers was incredibly fond. And in the work of Bierce, Hastur is the name of a god of shepherds. But in Chambers, first of all, I guess in the story, The Repairer of Reputations, we have Hildred who says that he is descended from the Hyades, Aldebaran, and Hastur. Right? He's descended from the Hyades, Aldebaran, and Hastur. Well, the Hyades are a star cluster. Aldebaran is a star. And Hastur, the way he discusses it, it seems as though that's a place too, or a celestial body of some kind. Not a god, not given really any personification or anything, until the story Demoiselle d'Is, which is not one of the 4 scary stories most people read, but in Demoiselle d'Is, there's a human being named Hastur, and there's nothing particularly special about him. He's just like kind of a guy. He's a servant to this lady that our protagonist falls in love with. And he's just like a butler. That's it. And so there's no giant squid god in Chambers at all. As for the King in Yellow, the King in Yellow, the being, I mean, right? Because in the stories, there's the stage play, The King in Yellow, and then it appears to be about this world Carcosa, and there's scant mention of this being called the King in Yellow that wears a sort of a tattered mantle, and is a king whom emperors have served. And there's not a lot of direct description, but I think in Chambers' work, the King in Yellow is meant to be kind of an anthropomorphic representation of nihilism or purposelessness.
Gotcha.
In the way that the Grim Reaper is an anthropomorphic representation of death.
Right.
Every character who's read The King in Yellow sort of struggles with the idea that the world has meaning, or that someone they love will love them back, or that they will ever achieve anything of note. And the King in Yellow seems to sort of like represent this dread or this fear or this idea that the world is set up in a way so that everything that you hoped for is non-existent, and that all of your dreams are all lost. One thing that's constantly said about Carcosa is that Carcosa is lost. It's lost. Carcosa is lost. And everybody who reads the stage play, they're like obsessed with Carcosa, and also obsessed with the fact that it's lost. So a lot of Derlithian writers and a lot of Derlithian gamers, right? They interpret Carcosa as being like the lost city of R'lyeh in Lovecraft, right? Like an alien ruin or something. In our game, Carcosa is heaven. It's like the Christian heaven. It's just that it's been destroyed. It's ruined. It doesn't work anymore. There used to be a place where you could go when you died, and it would be a soothing sort of a happy ending to existence, right? And there'd be angels and saints and God on a throne and all that stuff, but not anymore. It's gone. It's just not there. There's nowhere to go when you die anymore. Heaven is lost. Heaven is gone. And as for the angels, they're all dead. They're all undead monsters. As for God himself, he's also dead and an undead monster. And so in our game, the King in Yellow is God's undead corpse.
Wow.
And as for why heaven is in ruins, why is God dead? That's something that we kind of leave open in our game. It's probably something you did, but and this sort of ties into where Chambers is coming from. I think Chambers' ideas about cosmic horror and gothic horror are very much tied up with Enlightenment era fears of a purposeless universe. If you think about when Chambers is writing, it's around the time of, Nietzsche writing that God is dead, Dostoevsky writing that if God is dead, or if there is no God, all things are possible. You've got people drawing theological conclusions from Darwin's Origin of Species. You've got the French Revolution showing that no king is appointed by any immortal power, right? So this idea that there's nothing, there's no supernatural grounding to the world. There's no purpose, right? The Earth has been unchained from the sun, and we're just like going in without aim. That was sort of Chambers' sort of vision for cosmic horror, I think.
Sounds pretty intense.
Yeah, and contrast this with Lovecraft, right? So for Lovecraft, cosmic horror is about the fact that the world is so alien that our human minds can't really grasp it. And the ideas our human minds cleave to about science and about, being able to subsume the world under these laws and things. Right, Lovecraft's horror is very much about how you can't quite grasp the deep truths about the reality. They're so alien that if you tried, you would go insane.
Right.
For Chambers, you can grasp the fundamental truths about reality. And when you do, you're going to become very sad, very distraught, obsessed with Carcosa, that is, obsessed with heaven, obsessed with, this beautiful condition you can never have. And it's more about that. It's a very gothic version of cosmic horror, where it's not so much, it's not about tentacles from Dimension X. It's more like, it's more like a literal interpretation of God is dead.
Right. Yeah. Of like,
and instead of like a philosophical sort of idea about, the significance of atheism on our ideas of, purpose or whatever. It's like, no, also God is literally dead.
Yeah.
Thing.
It's funny. I think I told you this earlier this week when we were chatting, first getting to kind of know each other. I'm sitting at work and I was trying to listen to the book, and I kept typing Carcosa over and over near the beginning when the narrator was saying Lost Carcosa, and I'm like, oh dang it. So see, it does get in your head.
Yeah. In fact, my first experience, I had ordered the anthology from a local bookstore in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, where I was adjunct teaching at Moravian College. And as I waited for the book to come in the mail, I found a LibriVox recording of The Repairer of Reputations, and I listened. And I think I was maybe a third of the way through. It was at that point where Hildred was listening to Hawberk polish some armor. He's listening to somebody polish a suit of armor. And he described how thrilled he was and how his skin, the hairs on his body bristles as he like he has almost like this incredibly intense, joyful, almost like erotic experience listening to Guy polish armor. And I realized as I was listening to it, I'm like, this guy is unwell, isn't he? I am listening to a very disturbed man. And then like I leaned in more close and I was listening very closely to the rest, and I realized that there was something special here. It reminded me of reading Nikolai Gogol's Diary of a Madman, but with a lot more subtlety and a lot more symbolism.
Right.
But
yeah, I've got to finish this book.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. And please hit me up for recommendations for other King in Yellow literature, because there's a lot of it now.
Oh, I certainly will, because I could sit and talk about this and listen to you talk about this. If you ever give a lecture, let me know. I will be there.
I do have a trio of videos on my YouTube channel, PHD&D.
I will be watching those tonight.
Yeah. And in each video, I not only talk a bit about Chambers' work and our interpretation of it, my interpretation of it, but also about our game, and we sort of tie them together. So I'll talk about Chambers' ideas about, supernatural threats and dangers, and then I talk about the monsters in our game. Or I talk about, the ill-fated characters in Chambers' stories, and then the PC types in our game. And, I do sort of that. So
cool.
Feel free to
definitely check those out tonight.
Yeah.
So you just brought up the game. Let's hop into that. One of the things that I saw in looking through the PDF and mentioned in the Kickstarter is it looks really easy to set up and get going. Could you kind of explain? I guess you'd say it looks like it looks like 6 steps, if I recall from memory, to get the game set up.
Oh, okay. Yes. If you're playing the game and you're running a PC, you just need to choose one of the one of the character classes. We've got 4 now. We might have more, but you choose one of the character classes. You sort of come up with a name and identity for yourself, and that's pretty much it. There are some questions to fill in, sort of lore wise and to help, fit you into the setting. But character creation, it's very quick. It's like you pick a class and you pick a name and sort of, your appearance and things. If you're running the game, there's a series of steps to that. First, of course, is you choose a setting. And by setting, we mean a time period and a location. The only requirements on the setting are just that it be a realistic location and time where ordinary people exist. That's it. So don't. I mean, maybe you could, but I wouldn't recommend setting it in like the land of Narnia or something. You should set it at a real, point in human history, whether it's in the past, in the present, or maybe even some anticipated future point where we're all living on space stations or something. But pick a setting, and of course tell your players what the setting is so they can prepare. Maybe talk with them about which sort of setting they would want. That's fine. And then you pick a nightmarish theme for your game. And this is just intended to help guide you when it comes to describing encounters, coming up with events on the fly that fit the flavor. Come up with a nightmarish theme. For instance, we've got 4 that we suggest and talk about, the theme of falling, right? Falling being a scary thing that comes up in people's nightmares. Falling dreams are very common. Or being pursued, right? Being chased dreams, right? That's a nightmarish theme too. Or another one is being suffocated or confined, right? Is a nightmarish theme. Or another one is being attacked, violence. And those are the 4 that we play with, although of course you could come up with others. But we have like falling, being chased, being suffocated or confined, and being attacked. And you sort of pick one of these because it'll help you generate story elements with the players as you continue. Then, having picked a nightmare's theme, you do 2 other things. You pick a physical crisis and a metaphysical crisis. And a physical crisis is just something that's happening that would be disturbing or frightening to ordinary people during that time, right? Could be a plague. It could be a series of wildfires. It could be a series of violent attacks by highwaymen. It could be, natural disasters. It could be an economic depression. It doesn't have to be dramatic. It could be just there's lice everywhere, right? But the idea is that, yeah, I know. But the idea is that you pick like an ordinary sort of, problem that besets the setting. And then a metaphysical crisis is, well, you pick a supernatural problem that also besets the setting. Are gateways to hell opening up and weird monsters coming to drag people away? Are spiders the size of Volkswagens like crawling around eating people? Is there another planet that's on a collision course with ours that's about to destroy it? Is there a kaiju stomping around? And you pick something that's like totally supernatural. That's sort of a threat.
Very
and the idea and the idea is that let both of these things sort of be guided by your nightmarish theme. Right. So if you chose the theme of falling, right, you might have your physical crisis be like an economic depression, right? Like falling rates of employment, falling stock market. The business itself is failing and falling. People are being laid off. Some people are maybe even jumping from skyscrapers because they lost everything. Falling, right? And then the supernatural theme could be something like a planet is falling towards ours, like a large planet is on a collision course with Earth, like that movie Melancholia or something.
Yeah.
Or maybe the theme is suffocation, right? And it could be like on one hand, you're on a space station and you're running out of oxygen, but then on the other hand, there might be some giant space monster that's about to eat everything. Or the idea is that you choose a physical crisis, a metaphysical crisis. They're of the same flavor, and then you choose some. You get some ideas for some nightmares that your characters might have. These are like encounters that they have where they meet and are endangered by monsters and things. And then once you've done that, you run the game. That's it.
Nice.
So the idea is the gameplay goes back and forth between characters being awake and characters being asleep. At the very beginning of the game, all of the characters are having a nightmare. It's a shared nightmare. They're all having the same nightmare and can see each other in this nightmare, and none of them have ever met before, right? They don't know each other, but they're meeting for the first time in a nightmare that's full of monsters and things that are trying to, suffocate them or chase them down or, eat them as they're falling from a great height. And that they start out having a nightmare, and then they wake up, and once they wake up, they have to convene, meet each other for real in real life, having met each other in a dream, and try to find the yellow sign, conquer the world, do what the monsters in the dream were telling them to do. And the gameplay goes back and forth between being asleep, being awake, being asleep, being awake. And by the second by act 4, by the way, these are 5 serial parts, they're called 5 acts, right? By the end of act 4, things should be absolutely extreme in the events. The PCs will have acquired power to do all kinds of strange things, level buildings, command armies of millions, right? Change the laws of space and time. And at the same time, this is intentional, because at the end of Act 4, your players are probably dead, or the player characters are probably dead, not the players. Player characters are probably dead. And then you sort of then you look back and you ask, like, well, what were you really doing when you thought that you were wielding supernatural powers? Did you really level a building? I mean, with your magic? If not, what was it? Did you just point at the building and say, "I'm leveling you now"? Or did you actually rig it with explosives and blow it up for real? Because like you're disturbed in that way, right? But the fifth part of the game is you look at this escalating series of events where characters are following their dreams and trying to conquer the world, and you sort of reinterpret what they were really doing this whole time.
I think my players are going to be very terrified by the time I get done running this.
Yeah, our rules are designed in a way to escalate criminal behavior from the PCs. Right, they start out and they're in this horrible dream where monsters are telling them that they have to go and do something. The world depends on it. You have to go and find the yellow sign in this one location. And so the players, they start to do that. But as they search for the yellow sign, there's also mechanics which encourages like erratic behavior. Actually, let me talk about that mechanic. It's
go for it.
The flagship mechanic for our game, or at least the flagship narrative mechanic for our game, is consulting the stage play, The King in Yellow. Every one of the PCs has a copy of the stage play. Every one of the PCs has read it. Every one of the PCs is obsessed with it. And so once they get together, we have this sort of 4-step process where they consult the King in Yellow in order to find out how to fulfill their destinies. Right. So what they do is this. They flip open the King in Yellow, they look at an illustration, and they interpret that illustration as a series of instructions which they must follow. And the gameplay goes like this. One of the players, and you can either determine this randomly or just whoever's turn it is, but one of the players comes up with a scary image. Right? It could be anything. It just has to be a scary image. One single static, unmoving, scary image. It could be gruesome and grisly. It could be eerie and mysterious. It could be subtle. It could be complex. It just has to be scary. And then the player rolls some dice, makes a check to see whether their character can hang on to that scary image. And if they can, then play proceeds next to the next player, who has to interpret that image as a set of instructions. What is this telling you to do? Right? So if, let's say that the scary image was like the ground is broken open and there's a scaly hand reaching up out of the ground, right? That's a scary image.
Yep.
Cool. What's it telling you to do? A scaly hand reaching out of the ground. What does that mean? Does it mean that we're supposed to go underground and then reach up? Does it mean that we need to find someone who has a scaly hand and like chop it off? Does it mean that we're supposed to, maybe there's an organization, or maybe there's a bar nearby called the Scaly Hand. Maybe we need to go there, right? And players, because this is a storytelling game, players are free to suggest and stipulate here too. Right, instead of like asking the GM for permission of like, oh, is there a bar called the Scaly Hand? They might just suggest it and make a check to see if there is. And it's like, yes, that's what we're supposed to do. Go to the Scaly Hand. And then they do. And then they consult the King in Yellow again, and another scary image tells them like, oh, you need to start a fight with that guy over there or something. But the idea is this: is that you come up with a scary image, you interpret it as a set of instructions. The PCs have to follow those instructions and then deal with the chaos that results. And because you always begin with a scary image, right? It's always something weird or gruesome, right? This means that the instructions are always going to be something kind of, well, at least criminal, if not violent or erratic, or something that would disturb ordinary people, right? So the idea is that your characters, they're going to burst into a bar and like, I don't know, knife the bartender or something, and their explanation is, look, we have to find the yellow sign and conquer the world. You see, you might not understand, but there's a planet. It's about to smash into the earth. We need to use our wizardry to stop it. And this illustration in the book tells us it's right here. Yeah. And so you can see how the mechanics are conducive to letting players play a role where they're unreliable narrators. They're doing very, very extraordinary things with very absurd explanations. They're behaving in exactly the sort of way where you'd want to ask, like, well, wait a minute, this can't be right. No, like, what's actually going on here, right? And so in the fifth act of the game, right, this is where we sort of look back and we say, like, all right, were you really saving the Earth from a falling planet by knifing a bartender and using that as a ritual or was it just like you got really disturbed because the company laid you off and you and your fellow employees from Hastur Corp, you just didn't have a good night and right? And so the idea is that, like, as gameplay proceeds, the PCs are expected to mostly attend to the metaphysical crisis, right? But once you get to Act 5, it could be that the explanation for their behavior was not the metaphysical crisis but the physical one instead. Right.
I love this whole collaborative storytelling.
Yeah.
With the game.
Yeah, and oh man, we've had some really fun games in a variety of settings. We've played in a corporate skyscraper. We've played in a deep sea drilling station at the bottom of the Mariana Trench.
Oh boy.
We've played in a medieval village. And it's always fun. Actually, we've done a few deep sea drilling station games, and almost always what happens is the player characters will blow it up. they almost always die from like turning off the life support or turning off the safety conditions or trying to leave,
opening the hatch and just flooding out the
and you get these fun, a lot of fun, kind of claustrophobia, thalassophobia, like in the game Iron Lung, or in that film Underwater. I think it stars Kristen Stewart. But
is that I'm not sure if I have the right movie that came out like maybe 2 or 3 years ago.
I want to say like it's 2020, I think. Underwater.
Yeah, I think I'm thinking of the same movie, but
yeah, they're at a deep sea drilling station. We just took the idea from them as a cool idea.
It is a cool idea.
Yeah, just being at the bottom of the sea is terrifying.
Right, because it's pitch black. You've got all this like crushing pressure around you that just so many things could go wrong, and you're gonna make them go wrong.
Yes,
it's like
yeah. In the medieval game, it's the characters were like peasants, and they almost always try to like assassinate some member of royalty and get caught and meet their end that way.
Oh, boy. This is going to be so much fun.
Notice, by the way, when I talk about the game, its mechanics, gameplay, and how to set it up, all of the things I've mentioned are narrative, right?
Right.
Narrative rules, right? So, they think of a scary image, you interpret as instructions. All of you play as erratic characters, then you reinterpret what might have really been going on. Those are narrative rules. We also, of course, like any game, have dice mechanics. They're very minimal because we don't want them to really So we've been playtesting and designing this game for about 20 months, very rigorously, several playtests a week sometimes. And we, gave out questionnaires and did statistical analysis on their answers and stuff. And one thing we noticed is that the more technical and tactical elements we put into the game, the more the storytelling elements were hindered, right? So that if you gave player characters a set of skills and attributes and points that they can put in this or that, it made it very, very hard for them to, it made it harder for players to really focus on the story part of like just what their characters were doing in this universe, right? They were focused on like, well, I want to put more points in strength, so that way when I make a check, I get to roll more dice, not fewer dice, and it's just we don't want the game to be about that, right? There are games that do that. They probably do it a lot better than we would have if we were going for that. So our dice system is quite minimal. We use one of my favorite dice systems, which is the Resistance Toolbox. This is designed by Grant Howitt and Christopher Taylor. They use it in their game Spire, as well
Great
as
game.
Spire is amazing. As well as Heart, the City Beneath, which is a favorite of mine. I got both on my shelf here. They're delightful.
I've got mine in the other room. So.
Yeah. Anything that Rowan Rook and Deckard
Yeah.
puts out, I just love it. And their resistance system is a very elegant, self-contained dice system where the players will have more or less a diminishing set of resources. Or I guess less, it's not so much a diminishing set of resources. It's more like you're counting upward from zero, and things get worse and worse and worse, and it's hard to count down.
Right.
But we thought, this would be a great dice system to just incorporate into our game, a very minimal dice system. So, if a PC ever does anything with a risk of failure, they roll 2d10s and take the higher number. Or if they're using the one little supernatural power that they have, at least at the start of the game, they can roll 3d10s and take the higher number. But once you get that number, you then see whether you succeed, fail, or succeed at a cost. And if you fail or succeed at a cost, you take strain, right? It's like damage. You count up. You count up from zero. Every time you fail or succeed at a cost, you take 1d4 strain. And of course, every time you suffer strain, you roll a d12. And if the d12, as long as the d12 is above your strain level, you're fine. If that happens, you just keep the strain. Nothing bad happens to you. Your strain will continue to mount, of course. It'll be less and less likely that those d12 rolls every time you take strain are going to be above your strain total. So eventually it'll be equal to or below. And when the d12 roll is equal to or below your strain total, you erase all your strain and your character gains a monstrous feature. You become a little bit more monstrous. If you gain 3 monstrous features, they go, first you have a subtle monstrous feature, then you have a blatant monstrous feature, and then you have a critical monstrous feature. And then if you gain one more, you just become a monster. You write monster on your character sheet. And of course, one fun thing is this is a way to prompt player creativity too. The players get to describe how they become more monstrous. At the end of the game, of course, when you're reinterpreting things, is like, did you really become a monster, or were you just flipping out more in public, right? Sort of thing.
Right.
But the idea is if you gain 3 monstrous features, you get sort of a bad ending. It doesn't mean it's like game over, you have to stop playing, because it's a one-shot game. Just let everybody play to the end, But you might get like a worse ending or a sort of a worse resolution for your character at the end if you gained 3 monster, or if you became full monster, as it were. But yeah, that in Heart, the City Beneath, you take stress, and then if the d12 falls below your total stress, you take fallout and you reset the stress. We have the same sort of thing, right? You take strain. If the d12 ever falls below your strain total, you gain a monstrous feature. Monstrous features are like our fallout. And that's the one minimal dice system we have. There isn't really any other dice system besides that one. And we think that this is a virtue, not a shortcoming. There are lots of tactical games out there, tactical games with tactical strategy, and ours is a storytelling game, not a tactical game. So
right.
I guess like ours is kind of like the opposite of like Pathfinder 1E or something, or D&D 3.5, where you've got like all these different things. You got like 19 different skills and 3 kinds of armor class, and you've got hit points and spell slots and magic, right? Like all this, like lots and lots of assets and resources to keep track of. Our game is not about resource management. It's about storytelling and using the dice as a way to, help the story along.
Right, and enhance the story and stuff like that, which is
Yeah.
what I know I'm gonna love about this game. Is it's really such a breath of fresh air
Yeah.
because everything now is so, I don't want to say everything, but a lot of games are very tactical, like you were
Yes.
saying now. And I just love the narrative aspect of this. And sorry, my neighbor's dog is barking. I don't know if you can hear it, and it just threw off my train of thought.
Well, there are some real gems in the indie game scene that we were inspired by. One of them was Heart, the City Beneath, of course.
Yes.
Another one was Bluebeard's Bride by Magpie Games, and this is a really amazing storytelling game where the players together control different aspects of a woman's mind, a young woman's mind. And this woman has recently married Bluebeard, and she has to go and explore various parts of a castle, and she's doomed from the start. But the question is sort of how does the story play out? One narrative mechanic they have that I absolutely love is this mechanic where players will describe a key, like what it's made of, its material, like what the teeth look like, what, its texture, does it have an ornament on the head of the key, right? They describe a key, and once they do, the GM uses that as a prompt to decide what's behind the door that it unlocks, right?
Oh, that's neat.
And it's neat, right? And that was kind of an inspiration for our interpretive mechanic of, you think of an illustration, I interpret as instructions. And then there's a game, 10 Candles, which I really have to recommend too.
That's another great game out there.
A wonderful storytelling game where, like our game, it features ill-fated PCs. Right, this is not a game, right? In 10 Candles, the PCs do not, try to beat the monster and live to fight another day. No, it's about losing, but telling a really interesting story as you lose. And our game is more like those, much more like those. Than it is like a 5e D&D or Morkborg or and again, I like those games just fine. But
but
we're just doing it.
It's always nice to have a different choice,
Yeah.
And like I love to role play, and in some games, depending on how it's run, there aren't always opportunities to really dig into the story like there is with this. And that's what I love so much about this. And like with you describing Bluebeard's Bride and then thinking of 10 Candles, is you could inadvertently set the next player up for absolute failure without realizing it. And they just tell something, they take a little tiny aspect of what you said and really blow it up, and it's like so cool.
The mechanic for consulting the stage play is a lot like the game of telephone, in the sense that you start out with one word in telephone, and it gets filtered through people's ears and whispers, and by the end you can't really predict what you'll end up with, and it'll be an organic process in which people interpret and reinterpret what they think they're being whispered. And in our mechanic of consulting the stage play, likewise, it's kind of this organic process. You come up with an illustration, you come up with a scary image, but you don't know what people will fixate on or what they're going to interpret it as, or even if you think I mean, it's not going to be that way every game,
right?
And so you just can't tell what your characters are going to end up doing, right? Like you're gonna it'll be crazy. Like you start out and it's like the image of a shark, and you end up in a pet store beating someone with a tire iron or something, and it's like, how did this happen? and it does have kind of some comedy to this too, because like just
that's why I can't help but laugh. Is is how just you wouldn't want to see something like this obviously happen in real life, but at the game table, it's like you said, the absurdity, it almost in a way evokes a little image of Fight Club in my head.
Oh, a little bit. Yeah.
Also, you have not a whole lot of it. Yeah. Because it's like, I can't think of Ed Norton's character. Well, the spoiler alert, they're all he's the same guy, but he's got Tyler. And it's funny that you chose whispering, talking into his ear the whole movie,
Yeah.
telling him what to do. And
Yeah. Now that you mention it, this is an excellent opportunity to touch on another feature of our game, or at least a feature of our creative process, is one of the things we struggled with, and I think it's something that everyone struggles with when they enjoy cosmic horror, is the very outdated conception of mental health and of
mm,
insanity and stuff. And so, like in Call of Cthulhu, they just call it a sanity meter, and this can rub some people the wrong way. So we were very careful in describing this game and its mechanics to stick to words like delusion or deluded,
yep.
because there are many ways and reasons for somebody being deluded. They could have a fever, they could be on drugs, they could be deprived of sleep, they could just be very distressed, or it could be that they're magically affected by the text of The King in Yellow, right? But you don't even need to go into that other question of like, mental health, you sort of neurotypical behavior, and you can if your table's comfortable with that, and of course that's one way to interpret it. But I think that the fact is more just the characters seem to be deluded, and what that means, it doesn't mean insane in the medical. I mean, that's not even really a medical term, but the idea is that we wanted to be very careful and sensitive in approaching a topic that is otherwise sometimes treated kind of carelessly, where
It
people
is really in a lot of games. It's just like, oh, you went mad, you're insane. And it's like,
madness. Yeah,
yeah.
it's
And,
yeah.
it's
There are real people who have schizophrenia, and they live with it, and they have it treated, and they're normal people. I mean,
yeah,
this is the other thing. Like, statistically, people with schizophrenia are more likely to be victims of abuse than they are to be, abusers or crazy people with
yeah.
steak knives or whatever. And so we like this is just a thing. I guess I care about it a bit, personally,
I'm
but
right there with you because
yeah,
it is so callously represented in so many different forms of media that,
yeah,
if you look at, say, a schizophrenic in a movie, they're typically walking down the street, shaking, yelling at everybody that they go by. And
yeah.
that's not what it's really like.
Very cartoony, yeah. And,
Yeah.
and and especially when you look at the tradition of cosmic horror, where one of the tropes is going mad from the revelation or whatever, that it means that there's a responsibility, I think, game creators have if they want to do eldritch horror, or if they want to do something cosmic. Uh, take care. Now, of course, I know there are many tables and players that aren't that don't share my sensitivities about this, and they may say, well, who cares? And that's fine. You can run your game the way you want. There's nothing in our game that says you can't appeal to those Lovecraftian tropes, but we made sure that they're not required, they're not built in, and that they're just not part of the game's language is all.
Right.
uh, I thought I wanted to mention that, because now that we mentioned Fight Club and stuff, we're
Well, just the
talking
way
about
it's
mental health.
depicted in that movie, because, it's again a callous movie, but where you had said whisper, it kind of made me think of that, of him being like, "Hey, go do
Yeah,
this." And, it's, but yeah, I'm right there with you of how I think mental health should be regarded in games.
great, yeah. Well then, another perk for ours.
Yes. Um, I'm trying to see. I feel like we've covered a lot of what I wanted to talk about. We did pretty good at just vibing off each other with this. And
Yeah,
the one thing I wish we could show folks in the back is the Phantom of Truth and Camilla. It's such a cool
yeah.
image. But the monsters in this game,
Oh yes.
what kind of monsters and other terrors really can people expect to encounter?
Yes, especially in our in the nightmare parts of our game, we have encounters with various creatures that are inspired by Chambers' stories. There aren't any real monsters in Chambers' stories, unless you want to count, a couple of creepy human beings, like an organist who is at a church who does some strange things. And the King in Yellow, the entity appears for 2 sentences at the end of one story. I guess that's kind of a monster, but let me talk about the phrase "the Phantom of Truth." So when obsessed protagonists in Chambers' stories talk about Carcosa and the King in Yellow, they frequently mention the Phantom of Truth, the Phantom of Truth, and it's an interesting phrase. It's a poetic and sort of inspiring phrase, but I think it has its origins in a poem by Edgar Allan Poe, a writer of whom Chambers was doubtlessly fond. Chambers loved Poe. And that poem is The Conqueror Worm. And in Poe's poem, right, I'll be brief. The poem describes how there's a throng of angels, and they've all gathered to see a play of hopes and fears, right? And the play that they watch, the stage is like this cosmic stage. It's like, planets are orbiting around it, and it's like the universe. Angels are watching the universe. And these creatures run onto stage. They're like mimes. They run onto stage and they're chasing a phantom. And the phantom, what they're chasing is unreal. It's a phantom. It's like an illusion, like a mirage,
Right.
a phantom in that sense. And they can't even control their movements as they run around on stage erratically, chasing things that aren't real. And then a giant worm crawls onto stage and just rips them all apart and eats them and eviscerates them.
Oh boy.
And then and the angels get up and they say, "Yup, that's humanity." Right? The play is the tragedy man and the hero the conqueror worm, right? And the idea is like it's a profound stage play whose lesson is that human beings are nothing but worm food, right? And I think this had an effect on Chambers, right? I think that The King in Yellow is kind of like that stage play, right? It's the text of the play that the angels are watching or something. But the Phantom of Truth, right? That I think the idea is like, it's not so much that there's a spooky ghost thing that is like, I'm the Phantom of Truth. It's more like truth is a mirage.
Yeah,
Truth,
that's what I was
truth
going to say.
is a phantom. And that's kind of, that goes along with the nihilism and purposelessness and godlessness that seems to be bound up with Chambers' idea of cosmic horror, is that there is no truth. That being said, we did, because of that, the monsters in our game, they're all sort of inspired by this particular poem and by things that Chambers says that seem to embellish the poem's imagery. So we have lots of our monsters are undead angels, like ghoulish undead seraphs and cherubs, that are very spooky looking. Our artist Mel Williams, who drew the monsters, really deserves some commendation, because these illustrations are great. Please check out the free PDF and just check out some of our monsters. They're spooky. We did name a monster the Phantom of Truth because it seemed kind of appropriate. We made it up, right? I mean, if the King in Yellow is God is literally dead and here's his corpse, why not have also a literal Phantom of Truth?
Right.
So we have a lot of undead angels. We also have these creatures that we call worms of Carcosa. And this is just an idea I thought of. I thought, like, what if there are these horrible creatures that emerge from the wreckage of heaven in the way that maggots emerge from old bread? Like they just sort of like grow there, like mold. And they're horrible, and they hate humanity, and they sort of laugh about how the world is purposeless and people are an accident. So we have these two sorts of monsters, undead angels and these weird worms of Carcosa, and there's plenty of illustrations of both of those over the free PDF. We also have a lot of biblical kinds of, not, I wouldn't say strictly biblical, but if you look at the writers that Chambers was influenced by, Edgar Allan Poe and Baudelaire and Maupassant and these writers, a lot of them appealed to Heinrich Heine. A lot of them appealed to biblical imagery, right? Like Poe in his poem The Raven, he asks, like, is there balm in Gilead? Right? And when he asks that question, he's asking, like, does life have any vindication? Is there any point to living? But he's using like this biblical reference, Gilead.
Right.
Is there balm in Gilead? And so we tried to lean into that vibe. So we've got like encounters with, like the Leviathan or something very much like the Leviathan from the Book of Job. And of course, I was reading John Langan's The Fisherman when I came up with that encounter. Uh, we've got some kind of like biblical-esque monsters in there too. I was really give me 1 second here.
Yeah, sure.
I was really inspired by this text too, by Esther Hamori, just called God's Monsters. And
write that one down.
It's just a fun text about, well, all the monsters from the Bible, all the parts of it. I don't know Hamori's own sort of religious perspective. The text is not written devotionally. It's more of like an academic study on
a broad scope like this
on the monsters in there.
Right.
Our game also, I should say, our game is not like in like a secretly religious game or I think that players who are interested in that sort of stuff might find some additional neat things to think about in our game, but it is not like a game that actually has like a religious component or
undertone or any.
No. It's just a horror game. It's just a horror storytelling game. But we really liked a lot of the sort of like imagery of undead angels and heaven being destroyed and all that stuff. So it like those themes kind of like creep in a little.
Very cool. Well, yeah. I am so excited for this game.
Yeah.
And we've actually hit all the questions just in us talking that I had. Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you would like to?
I'd like to mention that, so our Kickstarter is only a few days into its launch. We're really hoping that we can meet our goal in order to print this book and send it to everyone. And our goal is specifically to make a really excellent book and send it to you really quickly. I know that as somebody who's backed many Kickstarters, it's very frustrating when you when a project meets its goal and you don't even get the thing until years later, right?
If you get it sometimes.
If you get it, yeah. And so we have a very focused priority on printing the book quickly and getting it to you quickly. So this means that a lot of our stretch goals, I can't reveal what they are yet, but they're going to be things that won't impede that process. Additional printed materials, things like extra art that comes on like cards and extra posters, bookmarks, and lots of digital content, VTT content. Is that a question that I'm getting?
That is indeed.
What made me create this design in the first place? If it's the design of the game, like in terms of its mechanical structure, I really wanted to create a system where by playing a group of players would come up with a story that felt like a story from Robert W. Chambers. I wanted to make a system where if you play this game, you're going to be a participant in writing a story, and the story feels like it belongs in that collection, The King in Yellow. As for the art direction for the monsters, I wanted to emphasize, sort of the terrifying nature of what an undead angel would look like, right? Like we've got these things called Fée Jaune or Yellow Fée, a play on Le Fée Verte, right? The green fairy. These are undead cherubs. And that's horrifying because, you think of a cherub, think of a Hallmark cherub, right? Like a happy little baby swaddled in like a little toga or whatever with maybe with like a, bow and arrow or something. But imagine an undead one of those. You're basically imagining an undead infant, right? It's I mean, we don't have drawings of that exactly.
No, I know, but I'm saying just the imagery that instantly comes to my head is like, whoa.
Yeah, these particular monsters, the upper part of their face is obscured and covered up by just a glowing copy of the yellow sign. So the scariest part I would imagine of like seeing a monster like that, like looking into its eyes or whatever. Fortunately, we spared the viewers that part. I sort of leaned towards art direction that was inspired sort of by. Well, I mean, Mel really sort of drew the art. I just had suggestions. So I guess what inspired Mel to make particular choices, I'd have to ask them. But I was really inspired by Robert W. Chambers' stories. I wanted to make a game where if you played it, you would be coming up with stories that were of a kind with his. And I also, for reasons I mentioned earlier, I wanted to make sure that, and we discovered this as we kept playtesting. We wanted to make sure that the mechanics were minimal. We wanted to keep it rules light, not just because it makes it easier to play, but also because the more mechanical elements you add, the more it competes with the effort to focus on the story and just be creative with the story. Thank you for the question.
That's great. Thank you very much, Mark. And if anyone else watching has any questions, by all means, ask away.
Yeah,
I'm sure Dr. Bowers would love to answer them if you do have any questions.
I would. I also want to recommend, this is a version of The King in Yellow published by Arc Dream Publishing. It's edited and annotated by Kenneth Haidt. You might know him from the excellent show Ken and Robin Talk About Stuff, where he and Robin Laws, they talk gaming things. But this version has an incredible set of annotations that sort of provide some neat background for what Chambers might have been thinking as he was writing, his influences, possible interpretations of the text, stuff like that. I also really highly recommend this book. I can't recommend it enough. I love it. It's called Under Twin Suns, Alternate Histories of the Yellow Sign. And this is just a lot of really great contemporary King in Yellow stories. There's one that I absolutely adore by John Langan called Helio Forge. You got Lisa Morton, and you've got Todd Keisling, Mark Abbott. A lot of really excellent writers in there. You've also got, Robin Law's New Tales of the Yellow Sign. This one has one of my favorite King in Yellow stories in it called The Blood on the Wall in the Fortress. It's a very creepy tale set in sort of a parallel version of Earth's history during something like World War I, but that isn't exactly World War I.
Interesting. I love that cover, by the way.
Oh yeah, I guess this is supposed to be one of Laws's Carcossans.
Interesting.
In his Yellow King game, he takes a lot of inspiration from other stories by Chambers, because there were a couple other stories Chambers had where he had like wacky creatures, strange creatures, and Laws took those and some ideas of his own and put them in his game. Our game, we reach back in time to the Gothic writers that inspired Chambers, like Poe and stuff, and we try to go more towards undead angels, heaven is ruined kind of thing. Whereas I think Laws's monsters are a bit more sci-fi.
Yeah, that definitely has a sci-fi vibe to it. That look. Yeah.
It looks like he has gills on his forehead or something like that. I don't know.
I don't know.
Makes me think of like the generic sort of forehead aliens from Star Trek. Right?
Yes.
Klingons, funny foreheads. Cardassians. It's cool stuff.
It is very cool stuff. And I've got a lot of reading and watching to do over the next couple days. So I'm excited. And
Can I explain the King in Yellow setting a little more? But it sounds similar to Stephen King. Interesting. I don't know. I'm woefully underread when it comes to Stephen King. I've read some of his short stories like Children of the Corn and 1408 and Graveyard Shift, and I've read bits of Wizard in Glass and The Wastelands, but only bits. But in answer to the question, our game is setting neutral in the sense that players can control characters at virtually any time period in history. The game could be set in medieval Europe. It could be set in the U.S. in the early part of the 20th century. It could be set in rural China. It could be set anywhere you think would be fun to have a scary story with unreliable narrators play out. The main thing about the game, setting wise, is each of your characters has read a stage play called The King in Yellow. And by reading that stage play, they've come to believe the following things. One, they are royalty from beyond the stars. They are destined for great things. They're probably destined to conquer the world. And in fact, in order to meet their destiny and achieve greatness, they need to find the yellow sign and use its power. the stage play The King in Yellow will guide the way. But that's the idea. Is the players control PCs who have read The King in Yellow. They've read the maddening stage play, as it were, and now they believe that they have a supernatural purpose, and they believe that they have supernatural powers that they can use to help find the yellow sign and conquer the world. And so it's about controlling these PCs who believe that they have this sort of supernatural purpose, supernatural powers, in otherwise ordinary setting, or at least seemingly ordinary. The people that you interact with are ordinary people. The buildings that you're in seem to be ordinary buildings. It's otherwise a mundane sort of setting. It's a fun metaphor for religion. Yeah. So here's a funny thing about religion and Chambers, which I think makes Chambers explains how he's very different from Lovecraft or some other cosmic horror writers. Chambers was more or less like in his life was kind of like a Boy Scout, like a Dudley Do-Right kind of fellow, right? Chambers, here's what Chambers was all about. America, freedom, God and country, democracy, true love, optimism, hiking and fishing and making love to women and smoking and painting. He was like a gentleman of leisure who loved America, and he was like very Christian, optimistic kind of guy, Boy Scout dude. He goes to Europe to study the arts in France and Paris, and in order to get good at the arts, he has to study with the French decadents. Now, the decadents, they're the very opposite of Chambers. They're pessimistic, they're nihilistic, they're atheistic, utterly urban, never leave the city, nocturnal, don't believe in anything, right? Their only interests are in like pushing how weird and gross their art can be and stuff. So I would imagine Chambers was sort of horrified by, but also fascinated by the decadents. They're so different from him, and I think that the King in Yellow, the stage play, is meant to represent like the horrifying idea that maybe the decadents were right. What if the decadents were right? Right? And heaven is lost, everything good is lost, there's no such thing as true love, there's no such thing as freedom or democracy, God is dead. No, like it seems as though the King in Yellow, the play, and also the King in Yellow, the figure, is meant to represent that kind of ideology, the ideology of the atheistic, nihilistic, decadent movement of Paris in the 19th century that Chambers encountered and was clearly influenced by, but not, I don't think, sympathetic to. Although he really did like, sort of gothic stories and spooky stuff. I mean, he loved Bierce and Poe and, these folks. But I think it's interesting when it comes to Chambers and religion, he seems to be more like a religious guy who is horrified at the idea of atheism than, say, Lovecraft, who is very much materialistic atheist, thinks, religion is short-sighted, primitive mammal nonsense in a more profound universe, right? Like those are very, very different.
Very.
So I think this is also why like Lovecraft's cosmic horror focuses on these sci-fi ideas, for lack of a better term, where you just can't conceive these alien realities. Whereas Chambers is much more fixated on the despair you would feel if the world had no purpose, or if everything was lost, as it were, or if all of your ambitions were just futile, or that sort of thing.
Thanks for the great questions, Games by Mark Wolf.
Yeah, thanks, Games by Mark Wolf. Cool. Is that a YouTube channel? I should check that out if so.
Yeah, I was just going to write that down. Is that your YouTube channel? It looks like he's got the YouTube logo on there, or actually that means it's coming from YouTube, because I can stream to YouTube and other channels. But if that's your channel, let us know. And you've got a couple new subscribers, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess other questions or other things I wanted to point out. I think we covered pretty much everything. I could talk about the individual King in Yellow tales and summarize them and talk about why I like them, but I don't know if we need to do that on this show. I would just stress, please check out our website, nilhemoth.com, nilhemoth.com. That's our company website. But please, especially check out our Kickstarter for 5X The King in Yellow. Our Kickstarter is doing pretty well, but we are teetering on that that edge where it's not. We're hoping we'll meet our goal. It looks like we have every reason to be optimistic, but these things can be close, and you never know how it's going to turn out, especially when we're still early into the campaign. So please
Right.
check it out if it looks appealing. If you're interested, pledge earlier rather than later. That'll increase the likelihood that we'll hit our goal, and be sure to start printing that book out. And also, even if you don't play tabletop role playing games very often, or it's just not your thing, this is going to be a lovely book to have like as a coffee table book. It's going to be full of great art. We're going to have some really fun, poetically expressed lore about Carcosa and Chambers' ideas. There's going to be King in Yellow stories in the book in appendix, and maybe even some original ones.
Cool.
So it's going to be a cool book, regardless. So please check out the Kickstarter, 5X The King in Yellow, and thank you ahead of time for doing that.
I will make sure links for everything are in the description below. Yeah, and if you haven't backed this, what sounds to be a fantastic project that Dr. Bowers has put together, hop over and back it. And if you're seeing this after the fact, hopefully you backed it and are loving the game. And also be sure to check out Dr. Bowers' YouTube channel, PHD&D. And subscribe there. He's got a bunch of great videos on there, more of which I have to watch tonight. Yeah. Is there anything else you wanted to bring up? I can talk or let you talk all day. I'm loving listening. I told you, if you have a lecture anywhere near me, I am there.
Yeah, if only my enrolled students had the same enthusiasm, right? But in any case, no, I think we covered it. Thank you so much for a very welcoming and easy interview, Dave. And I look forward to being in touch further. So thank you very much.
And thank you for coming on. I was so excited when Brian put us in touch and I saw what you were doing, and I was just like, and thank you, Brian, for doing that, by the way.
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, I am in love with this game. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I've got the PDF downloaded, and again, I will make sure that link is down below. And I'm gonna try to run some friends through this and see how much discomfort I can create at the table that they enjoy.
that they enjoy. Yeah, we are working on a recorded Let's Play so that people can see other people play it and sort of see what the rhythm of the game is supposed to be like.
Awesome.
Some people learn from that, so stay tuned for that. It'll be on our channel, on my channel, PHD&D.
And when you do that, send me a link and I'll make sure to add it to the description as well, so folks can check that out.
Yeah, 100%, absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Games by Mark Wolf and Brian, thank you so much for joining us today. Dr. Bowers, thank you for being with me, and we'll see you soon in Lost Carcosa. Have a great day.